What they swear to is that at 4:30 in the morning, a truck pulled up to the Detroit center where they were counting ballots. The people thought it was food, so they all ran to the truck. It wasn't food. It was thousands and thousands of ballots. And the ballots were in garbage cans, they were in paper bags, they were in cardboard boxes, and they were taken into the center. They were put on a number of tables. At that time, they thought all the Republican inspectors had left, all but two had, and an employee of Dominion.
Now, let's be clear. There's several overlapping theories hypothesis that Giuliani and his clique is pushing. You have what he just said here, apparently a truck that people ran to thinking it was food. They were hungry. Instead, there were ballots, so the people were disappointed. And they threw the ballots on the table. They were in trash cans and everything else. Okay, there's that. Then there's the other one that his partner, the woman who they're trying to pretend is not part of their legal team, basically arguing that the ghost of Fidel Castro and the bad intentions of Nicolas Maduro, with the blessing of Cuba and, the god brother of Xi Jinping or something, had came together in order to working with the CIA to beat Joe Biden. You think I'm embellishing that? I am not embellishing that. That's what the legal team was basically saying on television. So my argument was always, you guys have all the money in the world. Trump calls himself a billionaire. Great. Take it to court. Let the court suss that out. I don't need to sit there and suss out this kind of nonsense of him waving affidavits around in the air. No. If you have some level of legitimacy to it, take it through the court system. And they did. Trump filed all sorts of legal claims associated with losing this election. And those legal claims are just being squashed because what they're not finding is the ubiquitous fraud that Giuliani and Trump are alleging. They are just alleging it. They're asserting it. The other lunatic that's talking about the Dominion machines working with the ghost of Fidel Castro and the bad intentions of Maduro and the Xi Jinping's godbrother, with that conspiracy theory, that's also like this other aspect of it. So it's like, if that's your legal team and you're the president of the United States and you have people saying that stuff on television, waving these things around on television, looking like a maniac, and you're the president, this looks embarrassing. It's ridiculous, right? And yet, Trump still does it. Now, I strongly suspect that part and parcel to the reason that Trump is doing this is because of the way they attacked him when he first got into office. Now, that said, that could just be a justification for an ego and not wanting to deal with the humiliation of taking his box and walking away out the White House with America condemning a finger saying, you're fired. That's embarrassing. What he may do is just leave saying, I was cheated, I couldn't do anything about it, but I was cheated, and walk. And the catch is, yes, that will damage Joe Biden's legacy because it comes across to a large number of people that he didn't win legitimately. It adds a certain degree of doubt, and doubt among people who don't want to believe Joe Biden won anyway. This is the Russiagate stuff, right? You have Trump working with the Russians, and Democrats can't fathom how the most status quo of politicians lost to reality show hosts, especially when everything told them that she was going to win, her a 98% chance of winning. So if you add in the Russians, what did Mark Twain say? A lie gets around the world before truth puts on its boots. Off to the races. Democratic Party loved the fact that it was Trump and loved the fact that they could attack him with Russia. The media loved this Tom Clancy-esque stuff with the president working with a foreign power to undermine American democracy itself. Yeah, all of these guys had motivated reasonings in order to go in this very specific route, despite the fact, screaming objectivity all along the way. In this very specific instance, though, Donald Trump, there may be other Republicans who are telling him to basically call it a day, dude. You've lost. But not a huge number, especially when you take into account all the Republicans in Congress and everything else. You have a few. You have the Romneys of the world. And you also have the Chris Christies of the world that is basically telling him to leave. Chris Christie is an interesting character in this because if you remember, Chris Christie was there with him on the airline strip when Trump told him, you can go down, but basically dismissed him. Or when he was standing behind Trump with those weird facial expressions for like 15 minutes. That was his henchman. So the fact that Chris Christie has come out is basically saying it's time to wrap it up, call it a day, has a certain degree of gravity to it. Now, you can say Chris Christie is on ABC News, and so, to some degree, he has to say that. But you can also think of it as Chris Christie is an establishment politician that got where he was with the system that's in place. And smashing or delegitimizing that system undermines his ability to even do his particular job. Meaning he doesn't necessarily want to destroy the system that got him to where he is in regards to prominence. He's telling him wrap it up. It's fascinating when you're watching this. Donald Trump, however, doesn't seem to be willing to do that. I'm going to show you Chris Christie's commentary. You saw Giuliani just a moment ago. And I've shown the clip of the other woman, going into the Hugo Chavez and the CIA working with the Joe Biden, all this nonsense. So I've shown that clip before, so we're not going to re-show that again. But I'm going to show you Chris Christie. Because whatever you want to think of him, in this case, I think Chris Christie is right. Trump has lost this race. And the only thing that he can do at this point is basically damage the edifice. Now, I have no issue if Democrats or Republicans had got together and said, okay, let's fix the electoral system, let's make it transparent, let's ensure that the public has full faith and credibility in the system, especially after 2016 when they kept hollering or screaming, Russiagate, Russiagate. We've undermined our democracy, but they didn't want to do anything about the electoral system. I would say that gets across that they didn't really actually care, nor did they really actually believe that the Russia stuff was real. Let's hear Christie. Let's hear Christie. Christie is the voice of reason in this. Whether Trump listens to him or not is doubtful. At a certain point, you go so far in a direction where it is hard to pull back. It's like if you were going to get married. The closer you get to the wedding, the more difficult it is to pull out of the wedding, especially when you get to the point where you're standing on the aisle. It is so much force oppressed upon you to go through with it at that point. Well, at this point, Trump may have gone so far that pulling himself back, or at the very least conceding, may be something that is difficult, if not impossible, for him to do, at the very least from his standpoint of ego. And he may have just accepted this notion that I'm going to leave without ever conceding that I lost. Let's hear Christie. Christie, give your friend some wisdom.
And here's the reason why. The president has had an opportunity to act.
It's time. Response back Pat Toomey on Twitter. Is it finally time for this to end?
Yes. And here's the reason why. The president has had an opportunity to access the courts. And I said to you, George, starting at 2:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, if you've got the evidence of fraud, present it. And what's happened here is, quite frankly, the conduct of the president's legal team has been a national embarrassment. Sidney Powell accusing Governor Brian Kemp of a crime on television, yet being unwilling to go on TV and defend and lay out the evidence that she supposedly has. This is outrageous conduct by any lawyer. And notice, George, they won't do it inside the courtroom. They allege fraud outside the courtroom, but when they go inside the courtroom, they don't plead fraud and they don't argue fraud. This is what I was concerned about at 2:30 in the morning on Wednesday night. Listen, I've been a...
Understand what he's saying here. I mean, that's actually rather profound. He's basically saying, look, the fraud argument is all theatrics. They have nothing for that. And he's right. I showed the video earlier where Powell goes on and attacks Governor Kemp, saying that Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, the ghost of Hugo Chavez, the bad intentions of Nicolas Maduro, Xi Jinping's the little person brother, and the blessing of Cuban doctors worked with Kemp in Georgia, who is a Trump supporter, mind you, in order to derail the election for Donald Trump. She said this on television. It was utterly astonishing. Let's let Christie finish. But his point is, look, one is theatrics. The other one, there's no legal argument. Understand what I mean? He's applying lawsuits just to make it as if he has a case. So when he goes out to the public, he could say, we're fighting this in the courts. Fraud. But when you get into court, it has nothing to do with fraud. And he loses those cases one after the next. Yeah, that's horrible. Because what that means is he understands that he lost. It has nothing to do at this point about winning and losing. If anything, he is just there to destroy the political system, or at the very least to discredit it. It's one thing if you go into court and you argue fraud. If you say we were defrauded, these people stole it, we saw all of these ballots and everything else, and you can sift out what's true and make your case. But what if you don't have that evidence? What if you know you're basically lying about having that evidence, and you going into court with frivolous lawsuits, making assertions and everything else is just there to make it as if you have an argument? So when you go out and you tell the public we're fighting fraud and this is taking place and that is taking place, you at the very least can reference a court case that most people are not necessarily going to dig into the details and figure out. It will be in and of itself enough that the case exists. Let's keep going. Yeah, that's fucking horrendous. I mean, this has nothing to do with winning at this point. It's all about discrediting a system that Donald Trump believes treated him unfairly. And let's be honest, has such a shallow ego of a person that conceding may just be off the table entirely.
Supporter of the president's. I voted for him twice. But elections have consequences. And we cannot continue to act as if something happened here that didn't happen. You have an obligation to present the evidence. The evidence has not been presented. And you must conclude, as Tucker Carlson even concluded the other night, that if you're unwilling to come forward and present the evidence, it must mean the evidence doesn't exist. That's what I was concerned about starting on election night, and I remain concerned today. I think it's wrong. I think what you've heard, lots of Republicans starting to say this. I said it on election night, and I hope more say it going forward, because the country is what has to matter the most. As much as I'm a strong Republican and I love my party, it's the country that has to come first.
Voice of reason, Christie. And he's right. He's right. Yeah, he's right. Look, this is going to be a weird time. And it does seem like there's a certain degree of revenge that has been imparted upon, the American public. How dare you not vote me in office? So, yes, I'm going to go play golf while you guys are dying like flies by the thousands. Yes, I'm going to push you into an economic cliff by not even dealing anymore with this notion of a stimulus. And beyond not dealing with the stimulus, pulling back and clawing back money from the Treasury to make it that much more difficult when Biden comes in. Like, the things that are being done almost in this kind of punitive way. Now, some items, like pulling the troops out of the country and everything else, he may think that's punitive from the standpoint of Biden or whatever, but I don't care if he thinks that's punitive. Yes, bring him home. But look, we're in it for a weird several months. And this notion of sovereignty is not something that typically gets questioned in the United States, but that is something that Donald Trump wants to touch. Think back for a moment. When have you ever remembered a sovereignty issue taking place? When have you ever even remembered anybody attacking the electoral system in and of itself? It doesn't happen. It is like a sacred item. The news media gets very edgy when people start talking about cheating and fraud, etc. In this case, look, my argument was always the same. Let Trump get his lawsuits. Let Trump get his recounts. And we can figure out who won at the end of the process. I wanted, because I needed, at the very least from my standpoint, an issue of transparency where the public can very well look and see who won with their own eyes. And if you try to squash that, and if you prevent that process, meaning stopping the lawsuits or trying to get them out of the way, then that idea of fraud, despite not having anything behind it, gets a little bit more legitimacy because you feel like you're being disadvantaged in the way the system is working. No, let him get his suits in. The fact of the matter is these are frivolous lawsuits. And he's not even alleging fraud per se in the lawsuits in the way that he's doing it outside. I mean, for God's sake, implicating Brian Kemp in a plan with Hugo Chavez's ghost. I mean, it's utterly astonishing. And yet, that is the president of the United States legal team. That's their legal team. Look, I'll end it here. I mean, Christie is right. I think I have the video up where the woman basically, oh yeah, I have to show this. All right, so let's do this. I have another video that I want to do on the consequences of going against Trump. Because, you know, my argument in the other video was basically that many of these Republicans are silent because there's consequences for going against Trump. Trump got 10 million more votes. This wasn't a situation where Trump collapsed in the polls or collapsed on election night. He overperformed in our political space. That also means, though, that people may feel some kind of way if the Republicans go after their guy or are shoving off their guy. They may feel some kind of way. Now, many of them may not necessarily want to be the first one out the barn, especially, and not get hit with that kind of label, especially if you can't necessarily tell the temperature of the people around you and you think it may disadvantage you in your race. Trump may be gone, yes, but he's not evaporating from the face of the earth. And you, in your particular election, and those people who are identifying with Trump may remember the fact that you went after him and said something. Now, people like Christie and Romney can make that case because they're not necessarily going to be impugned by the electorate in the way that some of the other candidates are. And I read the 21 names of the Republicans that hated Trump's guts. But again, you may get a few that may come out. But at some point, they're going to have to, yeah, this is fascinating. I don't know what happens here. I mean, I don't know whether Trump concedes or if he just doesn't concede and he gets escorted out. Either way, buckle up. This is 2020 and things are getting bizarre. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. I'll be right back.